everyone. Welcome to Incorruptible Mass. We are here to help you and all of us transform state politics. We talk a lot about how it's broken, what we can do to fix it, and how you can get involved. We know we can make a better Massachusetts if we all work together. Today, we are going to talk about the Senate tax package and the Senate budget, but mostly the tax package. In that tax package, we believe is a little better than the House or Healy's package. We're going to talk a little bit about short-term capital gains, cutting real estate tax. We'll talk about increasing the statewide cap for HDIP, as well as the earned income credits, and also a few things that we think are really unimportant that got in there. And we'll also talk a little bit about the fact that nobody is really talking about the budget in full and analyzing that. And why is it that with a state as large as Massachusetts, there's really no discussion of this budget that's coming out of the Senate. So before we go on, let me introduce my inimitable co-hosts, and I will start with Jonathan Cohn.
Jonathan Cohn, he, him, his, joining from the great city of Boston, Massachusetts, and have been an activist on kind of progressive issue and electoral work in Massachusetts for coming on a decade.
And Jordan.
Jordan Berg Powers, he, him, his, and I am coming from Worcester, Massachusetts, which is the unceded land of the Nipmuc people, and also the place where we now send people. Not only are we the home of gentrification, we're now the home of the person who's helped kick that off to run our housing policy.
I am Anna Callahan, she, her, coming at you from Medford, and, been super involved in local politics for many years and state politics for the last few years as well. Super interested in it and very interested in talking about this budget. Hey, nobody talks about the budget that's coming out of the Senate. We're going to have to, as a state, we're going to have to merge the House, the Senate, and the governor's tax packages. And because our state does not follow, does not have public records law for our state government, that means we have no way of knowing what the heck is in any of these packages, right? So we have to rely on crazy outside sources. We have to rely on people's, press releases and Twitter feeds. Yes, Jonathan.
So, you can see what's in it, but a lot of legislation is just not user-friendly in its language, which I think is the thing, and is not really designed to be. That there are some other states where they actually will provide lay summaries of what the legislation that they have to say that, like, if we're doing all of this, here is actually something that you might be able to read beyond the technical language. So that if you see something like a budget, most people can't understand that. Most people don't understand what line item, like string of code, really means in practice, as well as how it possibly changed from the prior year.
Yes, and that I think is crucial, is understanding who discussed what, who proposed which, changes to it. So much of this happens in these behind closed doors, backroom deals, and there's no way for us to know because our legislature is not under public records law. So let's have a little bit of an overview. We'll talk mostly about the tax package. Can we, maybe Jonathan, if you would be willing to, actually either of you, if you want to talk a little bit, first of all, about what we were unhappy with in the governor's and the House tax package, especially given that we just voted for the Fair Share Amendment and we just voted to increase taxes on millionaires and billionaires. So if you want to go ahead and dive into that, that would be great.
I can do a few quick things, and then Jordan tag in if I'm missing anything here. So a few of the main problems coming out of both what Healy was trying to do and what the House had done, both with regard to, let's say, some regressiveness of the package and size of the package. The main things is, one, if voters, as people remember, including, let's say, shout out to all of the listeners who voted last year for question one
and volunteered.
Exactly, which created an additional tax on income over $1 million to create dedicated funding for public education and transportation. For the first year, that's been basically like a trust fund of like $1 billion appropriated for that Healy proposed an allocation for, that the House and the Senate proposed an allocation for, and then Healy and the House proposed a tax cut of $1 billion. So like right as you're saying that we're raising $1 billion new, you're saying well, we're also cutting $1 billion new because all tax cuts are also spending cuts if the state is not increasing the total. Is not, let's say, for like it has that money is coming from somewhere. That like it's money that could have been spent. That's cool. So based on that, it's just it is a deeply problematic framework that they're literally saying where we got you this $1 billion of like we work to get this $1 billion of new money and they're cutting $1 billion in taxes.
And from the wealthy primarily through, you know, a few
exactly.
different
and
things that
and that like they were both disproportionately skewed to upper incomes with large cuts to the estate tax. Which the state tax is like the people who pay estate taxes are dead. And
they own property.
And they own property, exactly. They own property. That like that you should be so lucky if your estate is large enough to qualify for that because it's almost, let's say, an important thing to like take a step back and realize how the privilege of qualifying for the estate tax in the first place, of having that much in your estate. As well as both the House and the governor had wanted to cut the short-term capital gains tax. So that's for day traders and real estate speculators who are struggling and need a tax cut. As well as the House had wanted to give a tax cut for companies that are based in Massachusetts and do business elsewhere to just like throw some extra money at them. That Healy hadn't proposed. So both of those, like, just fundamentally bad fiscal policy to just be spending all that money away, especially on rich people and corporations, when we're at a time where, like, given how much of a mess the federal government seems to be, I wouldn't want to be doing things that put me on bad footing if I have to, like, if Massachusetts has to backstop certain programs, knowing that the federal government is already retrenching on things like Medicaid, which like people who aren't qualifying anymore for Medicaid because of federal changes, or let's say federal retrenchment from various programs, Massachusetts needs to put up more. So suddenly just cutting out money is a risky proposition.
Absolutely.
Jordan, anything else that you'd want to add on that for like scene setting?
Yeah, just that both the House and the Senate have cut overall our spending. So at a time where we are, we have a sort of we don't know the future. We're having roughly, either a level or a it depends how you figure it out, but basically either a level or a cut in the actual spending the state is making, investments in us, despite us adding $1 billion that we want. So we wanted to add money to the pot to invest in schools and bridges. And because of the tax cuts and and all of these other packages, overall now both the Democratic governor, the Democratic House, and the Democratic Senate are using Republican austerity politics. Like, it's just, I can't understand this. It's really just not what people voted for or want right now. When we have serious problems, and so I think that's the only other thing I'd add is just like overall, this is going to likely be a cut.
Yeah. And why don't you go continue a little bit and talk about how the Senate package has changed, like not the Senate package, what it has done a little bit better than the House and the governor's package. Yeah.
Fortunately, I was literally just making a slideshow for another purpose on this and putting together a table that so, and which I will get in front of me for some specific numbers. But say on unfortunate, like one just clear positive, the Senate did not make the short-term capital gains tax cut that the House had done and that Healy had proposed. What was specifically gross about the House, including the cut to the short-term capital gains tax, again, tax for day traders and speculators, is that Baker proposed it and then the House and Senate rejected it last year. And then Healy proposed it and the House said, yes. So that it's the same regressive tax cut, that it was a bad tax cut when our Republican governor wanted it. But now that our Democratic governor wants it, it's good. And that's just like fundamentally bad. Like it's just like the worst of the political system.
And this is not to say that in the past the House leadership and Governor Baker did not work together on many things.
Exactly.
So, you know,
it's the type of thing that there are so many things that's like bad things that Baker wanted that they were happy to do. And when you finally have like a bad thing, and it's like, yes, they were rejecting the bad thing that he wanted, that our Democratic governor asks for the bad thing, and then they're like, yes.
The other thing, quickly, the other thing I forgot to say overall is we didn't even mention the fact that Governor Baker did wrongly against the law. You know, whether or not it was malice or not, I'm still waiting for every person in jail to be asked if they meant to do the crime. But malice is always the thing. Like, oh, did it mean to break the law? Oh, well, forget it then. But so we owe the federal government $2.5 billion. $2.5 billion that was supposed to come out of our budget to pay residents their owed money. Instead, the Baker administration used federal dollars to pay MA residents for these programs. What's important about this is that Governor Baker claimed that we triggered 62F, and gave out $2.9 billion in checks. Again, not following the law. That's what he wanted to do. 2.5 billion, right? So just to do quick math, that means that he took money that was owed to the feds and gave it back to mostly rich people illegally. And the media has not covered this. The legislature is acting like it's not happening. They're still spending like this, like that 2.5 billion isn't owed to the federal government. We're gonna have to pay that to the federal government, and we are cutting taxes at a time where we have money we don't have. And on top of that, it was clear that the gymnastics he went through to trigger the law so that he could give money back, at the very least, should require some oversight from our auditor, from our attorney general. Instead, what happens is the political class just sort of closes ranks and says like, oh, this is, I don't know, Baker's popular, so just like, let's not deal with it. But like, this is a serious thing. And so I think we can't talk about the tax cuts and the Senate package without talking about this $2.5 billion that's hanging over us, because we got to pay for it. And it's going to come from someplace. It's got to come from someplace.
And when you talk about the fair share, that's $1 billion. When you talk about these tax cuts, that's $1 billion. And compare that to the $2.5 billion, we're talking, this is trouble down the road.
It's what's also striking to me with that when reading about that, like I have trouble not viewing it as intentional on his part, because what he did is effectively make it so that the companies that have to pay into unemployment didn't, like, that it was money that would have been assessed on companies that they didn't have, that then didn't need to be assessed on them because he used federal money to cover it. And if suddenly a bunch of corporations aren't paying taxes, like, I'm gonna think that the Republican governor intended for that to be like, exactly. I don't see like Charlie Baker being the type of person, like, I don't like Charlie Baker. I don't think he's an idiot. I think if that suddenly a bunch of corporations didn't have to pay $2.5 billion in taxes because that money was filled in with federal funding instead on his part, that it wasn't intent. Like,
right.
I think he tends to be somebody who's smart and malicious. So
at the very least, I think at the very least we could all agree that somebody should be dragged in front of some sort of public accounting to publicly say on the record in front of the law exactly how you explain how this very clear violation happened. Like just the fact that it's just like, oh, it's just whatever. Like, just, like the way the press covered it, like Healy says it wasn't malicious. Did she ask someone? Did we know? Is it on the record? Did they swear in front of, so that they can have court consequences if they lie? And did somebody happen? Like, and why is the Boston Globe covering for Baker by saying that like, oh, everything's fine? Because that's the implication of this, is just like, don't worry about it, but we should all worry about it.
I also just love the like, oh, how did Charlie Baker, wonderful manager, miss this? I don't know. Maybe it's either because he has garbage management skills, which we already know, or he intended, like, despite the fact that the press always loves to like listen to him and listen to his own like self-congratulatory praise and say otherwise, or he intended it, or perhaps
Or both. There you go.
Like,
or both.
But but it has to be one or the other rather than like,
right.
Imagine.
Right. So I think the other thing in the Senate bill that's disappointing, to say the least, is something that also happened in Healy's package and the House package. And I think the reason is that it's a program that, again, people don't understand. And it sounds good because fundamentally it fits into the racist narratives that a lot of our legislators have about the sort of cities and places that I actually live in. So this is a program in Ken called HDIP. And they have increased it from 10 million to $57 million. So what HDIP does is it gentrifies Black and brown and poor cities across the state. That's simply what it does. It says that the state government will give you a tax write-off if you create market rate housing. But market rate housing in every single city in the state of Massachusetts, because market rate is not for the city, it's for the area around it. On top of that, most market rate housing is already not affordable. See anybody who's tried to rent.
Well,
right?
I'm curious, like, why do they need to incentivize anybody to create market rate housing? I mean, this is the whole problem in any city. What you have is these, like, you must create like 15 or 20% affordable housing with your market rate housing. And all they want to do is create 100% market rate housing. So why is there a need for this incentivizing?
And this subsidizes the market rate and not the affordable side of it.
That's crazy.
And I think the important thing to note is that you can only understand this if you understand racism. Right? Because fundamentally what they're saying is no one would want to live or build in poor Fall River, in those poor, dumb, brown and Black people in New Bedford, in Worcester, in Springfield. The only way any developer, and Q in here, white developer, white man, they have, they're not saying it, but in their minds, that's what they're picturing, would be willing to spend their money to develop in these terrible places and do so in a way that's not affordable, because again, they look down on affordable housing. They don't see affordable housing as just housing that's able for regular people to live in. They see it as like, the poor live there, which is again not true, because most of the housing is unaffordable. So affordable housing just means affordable for everyone, right? Like, I just want to be clear that like most of the time it's just people live there. The people who live there now currently are trying to get into this housing. So, it's just fundamentally, it fundamentally hits racist tropes about our cities, about who developers are, about who needs money, about why people don't live there or can't develop there. And it misses the reality of all of these things, which is that they don't need money to develop. There is reforms that I think are needed. There's certainly zoning reforms that are needed. There are other things that we could be doing to be greener, to be closer to public transportation, right? Like, there are reforms for sure, but market rate is not the problem. And this is a program that has really gentrified gentrifying quickly. It's gentrifying my neighborhood. Like, just to be clear about what we're talking about, I live in a poor part of Worcester. It's gentrifying this part of Worcester. It is pushing people out. It is raising rents in my community and in communities like mine around the state. And it's a real problem, and it's a really crappy program. And if they want to increase people building, I'm for, like, let's subsidize it, but let's subsidize not market rate housing, below market rate housing, and family housing, 2, 3, 4 housing, right? So that people can live, because there's plenty of single rooms being built. That's the other thing, is this also is subsidizing a lot of and like, that's great. I don't think it should be a mixture. It shouldn't be just one or the other. We should try to house everybody. Yeah,
absolutely. I know today we don't have too much time. If we can, first of all, I'm going to say, you don't hear this news anywhere else. You're not going to hear the analysis that we do. So please, it would be amazing instead of getting an extra cup of coffee, go ahead and put that down. Look right below. You'll see a little donation link. You can say, 1 cup of coffee a week. I'm going to donate to Incorruptible Mass podcast. And that really helps us get the word out. It helps us reach more ears. It helps us make sure that our amazing young women, graphic designers, and, other artists and editors are able to get paid. And so with that being said, thank you so much for everyone who has already donated. And to those of you who have not yet, now today is your opportunity. I am going to go ahead and have Jordan jump in next. If you want to go ahead and,
Jonathan's going
Jonathan,
next.
thank you very much.
Just wanted to quickly tag in
Yes.
one more thing talking about the Senate's tax package before, and then switch over. So one thing that is good. So like I noted before, that the fact that they scrapped the short-term capital gains tax cut is a positive. That they didn't include one corporate tax giveaway that the House did was a positive. There are cut to the, like, I'd begin by saying we don't need to cut the estate tax at all, in my opinion. But theirs is notably less expensive, which is good. Whereas the Senate's estate tax cut was $185 million compared to $275 million of Healey's proposal and $231 million of the House. Healey wanted to raise the kind of the threshold for the estate tax to $3 million. Whereas the House and Senate both did $2 million, but the House did so in a way that would give larger estates larger tax cuts. Whereas the Senate did it in a way so that like all estates above $2 million get the same cut. So that like, I don't think any estate over $2 million needs to get a cut. But I'd rather them get a smaller. If we're debating between them, I'd rather be the smaller one rather than the larger one. So that the kind of the main hope would be, at least in the points where the Senate is better, once they go to a conference committee to hash out final details, that the Senate holds the line, particularly because their total tax package is smaller. It's about $586 million compared to the $1 billion of the other two.
So the other thing that the Senate does well is the earned income tax credit, which is a policy that puts money in the hands of poor folks at the real margins, really margins. It's mind blowing that people are trying to survive on this little money in this state. And so this is a really good program. I'm glad it got an addition. It is the only tax cut that makes sense. It is the only tax cut that makes sense. I want to say that again. There has been a lot of push in the media to sort of to mainstream tax tax extremists, people who don't believe in any taxation whatsoever, the Max Tax Policy Foundation. These are right-wing organizations that are extremists, and they get mainstreamed. And meanwhile, and then there's a big push for tax cuts. And I just want to say again that progressives don't want tax cuts. We want investments in the things that make sense, because we know from data that is a better use of money. So yes, the Senate does have money for childcare, it does have money for rental reductions, but those are not good investments. They are bad investments. They are just better uses of money than tax cuts for rich people. So I think that they are right. Like, let's be clear, we could use that money to really invest in an incredible, affordable childcare system, which is what we should do. And we should tax rich people more to pay for it, not lower taxes. We should have a credible system of helping people with rental assistance. We should tax people. We should tax corporations and tax rich people more to pay for that. We should tax sort of sales of homes and other things that are driving the cost up, and use that money to make it more affordable to rent. That's what we should be doing. And I just want to say that clearly, because that's not the coverage that's getting put out there about these packages.
Yeah.
Just one quick thing to tag on that I think is always important to understand. I think is how kind of tax credits and tax deductions are always individualized solutions to collective problems. That it's where like the government tries to engineer certain things on the back end to whether it's encouraging better behavior or incentivizing certain outcomes, when those actually need to be intentional, built into policies and programs to help everyone, rather than just try to like jerry rig a system on the back end.
Yep. And these are policies and programs that have been done in other countries for decades, many, many decades. So this is nothing crazy. This is nothing new. This is something, there's lots of research and studies, if you believe in science, that prove that these things actually benefit society and reduce inequality and give people good lives and make people happier.
And these are, and I think it's important because it's not that it's not real money for people, but it's a drop in the bucket to solve the problem. And so while on one side you're doing nothing really, in fact, if anything, you are increasing the likelihood that rates will skyrocket by giving money to developers for market rate housing. So you're going to increase rents, and then you're going to give people pennies on the bottom and individualize it, as Jonathan said. That's a problem. That makes it worse. And I just want to say that clearly, because it's just really lacking that type of coverage to understand that this is not a solution. It is a drop in the bucket. Do people need that drop? Yeah, because every little bit helps. But every little bit helps because you're failing them to address these real issues.
And in some ways making it worse. Well, thank you, everybody. We always love chatting with people. We love all the questions that we get. So please send them in. And we look forward to seeing everybody next week. Hey there. Thanks so much for watching us on YouTube. Please like and subscribe. And it would be amazing if you would also subscribe to us on your favorite podcast player. Just look for Incorruptible Massachusetts wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much.